You want to hear about my schooling and so on?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Especially if you got in trouble.
I didn't get in trouble except for one thing. I didn't. I was a goody-goody. I was awful. You wouldn't have liked me at all. But the one thing I did was that I was required to take naps all the time.
What age is this?
Well, even on the weekends after I'd started first grade and had all day, I had to take a nap. I think my parents needed to take a nap. I don't know. Anyway, I hated it, and I got restless. So I had to wear, because I bit my fingernails, I had to wear gloves, and the gloves had a little button here that was hard to open and close, and I could draw with it on the bed that I have now that has a headboard. That was the footboard of my bed, which was almost like a sleigh bed, and the headboard was much taller than what I have now. And it was my grandmother's. It had been my grandmother's bed. All of her children were born in that bed. It was a double bed, and we turned it into a queen-size bed, which helped a little when we were in the same bed more of the time. Anyway, that was serious because that was Father's mother's bed, and he'd been born in that bed, and you were not to do drawing on it. I couldn't resist it. So I had nothing else to do. I wasn't allowed to read. I wasn't allowed to do anything except lie there and supposedly sleep. And I didn't feel like sleeping. And so I did that several times, and every time I got the slipper.
The slipper.
What is that?
A spanking on my bare bottom with my father's slipper. He had a leather slipper, and it was a pretty good smacker. So it didn't just deter me at all. And my parents learned a little more from my sister, who was much more aggressive about objecting than I was. I really was a goody-goody. But Becky, we were both required to finish our plates every night. No non-cleaning the plates. Well, Becky'd say no. And they'd say, yes, you will. And Becky would say, no, I won't. And then they'd say, well, you will sit there until you finish that plate. So there were several nights that I went to bed and Becky was still at the dinner table and doing nothing about cleaning up her plate at all. And they finally had to give in. I mean, they didn't want to stay up all night waiting for her. And if they'd gone to bed, she would have gotten rid of it. You know, there wasn't a disposal, but there was some way, I'm sure, that she could have figured out how to get rid of it. So they finally learned a little bit of, not quite humility, but because they were perfect. My parents, I was sure, were absolutely perfect. And I adored them, except I could see that Father was really upset, and I suppose I had done it, so I had to take the consequences. But they never pushed on anything else. When I was 5 years old, my birthday's December, back then the cutoff date for entering a class was around September, I think, maybe Labor Day or something like that. So my mother took me to Malvern School to be tested by Miss Gabriel, the principal, to see if I could start that fall. Flunked it completely. She kept asking me questions, and I knew perfectly well that it might be so one way if such and such was true, and it might be so another way if such and else was true, and I wasn't allowed to say any of that. It was yes or no. I hated those questions and hated that kind of a test. Anyway, so I flunked. So I waited and entered first grade in January. We had overlapping semesters. So January is going to be my entry date. And I went into first grade, and my teacher's name was Miss Cardinal. I think she was Cardinale or something like that, because she was very Italian looking. And I don't think she ever wore anything except a bright red cardinal colored dress. I don't know that she had another one, I don't know. But anyway, she was nice. but we didn't have any books. No books in first grade. Everybody did writing, and they got papers to read, and they got papers to copy, and she quit on all of that and gave me something on the side. I do work papers or arithmetic paper, anything to coloring, anything to keep me busy while she tried to get these other kids to learn how to read. And Mother was right, I did know how to read, at least simple things. So the following fall, in September, when school started, Miss Gabriel met me in the hall and asked me if I'd like to go to second grade. Oh yes, will I get books? And she said yes. So I went home for lunch every day. Everybody did. And we had about an hour to get home. And I was driven. I was driven to school and I was driven home. I can explain that later. But so I couldn't wait to tell Mother, and of course she knew. She already knew that I was going to second grade. So that was a little bit of a downer. But then she offered to take me back to school. And we got there early. Nobody was in the classroom except Pinky Broadbent. Pinky Broadbent was missing 2 front teeth. I was nowhere near there. I was at, what, 6.5 or 6, something like that. And a little slow on the teeth development. And I thought Pinky was just fabulous. And Mother thought she was sort of funny, and she was. She was the daughter of a dentist. And I don't know why, but the missing front teeth and the daughter of a dentist. She's not my dentist, but anyway. And I sat in the row over next to the windows behind. I was given a chair and a book. And we were told to read it, and the teacher would be right back. Miss South. Miss South was that teacher. And all of a sudden I found out with Miss South that there were rules, and you better behave and do what she said. I stepped off the sidewalk once and onto the bushy grass, and I was scolded. Oh, I have to be careful not to do that again, ever. Well, while she was out, I got to some words in the book that started with WH and TH and GHT, and what are those words? I don't know how to sound them out. So I nudged a guy back of me, or a girl, I've forgotten who it was, and she said, no, ask the one in front of you. So I asked him, and he said, I don't know why, it just is. That's where, and that's when, and that's this, and that's that. Okay, if that's the way it is, then that was good enough for the time being until somebody told me differently. And he then disappeared as my mentor because he was moved up to third grade 2 days later. And it wasn't just because he'd helped me. Anyway, the boys in the class were real dull thuds. I didn't like any of them, but the girls were okay. And I learned a few things and went on through elementary school. I don't remember the names of all my teachers, except that I do remember one more. There was Miss Teagarden, and I think she was 4th grade, but she might have been 3rd grade. And when I got further up and got duty to take messages around the school, you don't do that anymore. You have a telephone or a message center or something. But kids got this duty every once in a while to deliver messages. Every time I walked into that class, she would give me a big hug and tell me I was her favorite student ever. And I was so embarrassed because I was her teacher's pet when I was in that class. And I hated it. Everybody called me teacher's pet. And it wasn't very fun. So and it went right on after I left the class. I still had to cope with her. Anyway, by 5th grade, my teacher was Miss Heindel. And that was the year that Mother had a stroke. And she had a stroke, she'd had hay fever, she had asthma. I had asthma as a 5-year-old. I was taken to Arizona, Southern California, in the mountains for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, 3 or 4 months, because I had too much I had too much trouble with sniffles and colds and things. And I was scrawny, I was undersized. Mother had an offer out to me, starting in about 6th grade or 7th grade, that she'd give me $100 if I get to 100 pounds. Never made it. I stuffed myself. One of the things was, we had a pediatrician. I took Liz and Amy to him when we were in Cleveland for a while. He took one look at Amy and said, club feet. And he was not a nice man. He was an unhappy man. Mother felt sorry for him because he lost his wife early and had to raise 2 boys himself. But he insisted 3 meals a day, no snacks. That's it. I mean, no grazing. That is out. Nothing. That was unbelievable. That's terrible. So you got breakfast, you got lunch, and you got dinner, and you got nothing in between except a glass of water if you wanted it. And I couldn't get enough in my stomach to fill up. And then I'd be starved, and I'd go and I'd eat and I'd eat and I'd eat, and I'd think maybe I'm going to get heavier. No. Still thin and scrawny by the time I finished high school. When I got on all those carbs that they give you in college, I finally put on a little weight. But until then, I had food allergies. I threw up every 2 or 3 nights for a long time. And I went to have allergy tests, and they did scratch tests on my back. And, oh, boy, was I itchy. And then they sent me home with a new diet. No eggs, no milk, no wheat, no chocolate, no peanuts, probably, I guess I could have a few peas and beans. I could have almost any kind of meat. But when you cut out some of that big stuff, it goes into other dishes, and it's hard. I could have canned milk, which is not like fresh milk. I could have boiled milk, which tastes a lot like canned milk after it's boiled for 5 minutes. and I could have ice cream. That was okay. But so then that stopped my throwing up, and I was better for a while, and then pretty soon it started again. So I went back, and this time they gave me hypodermic tests. But they didn't test everything. They just tested the things that they looked bad last time. Turned out what I was most allergic to was the rye that had become my substitute for wheat. Now, ordinary rye bread has wheat in it, so that didn't count. I couldn't have that. But I could have rye crisp. And rye crisp is not my of a sandwich. So that wasn't pleasant. But Mother's cook made barley bread for me. And when I went on the no wheat, no rye, we were getting a little bit far away from the kinds of things that I could eat or like. But when that started up again, the upset tummies, then I was told, just eat a little bit of everything. Just change. Don't eat a lot of any one thing. And I've been doing that ever since. And
Works fine.
and it works fine, right? Except I've got lactate problems now, but that's different. That's not an allergy.
What did you, what was the dress code like? How long did it take you to get ready in the mornings? Like that kind of
Well,
thing?
when we were little, we had our clothes sent to us from grandmother, who lived in Hollywood. She had divorced her first husband. No, her second husband. Divorced her second husband.
When was it?
And she was happy to live out there in the nice sunshine weather, and she belonged to a club, and Mac, her second husband, who took pictures of us and was a wonderful grandfather to us, except we called him Mac. We're not allowed to call him grandfather. Mother wasn't allowed to call him father. She had to call him Mac, because he wasn't really her father. Her mother's real father left his wife before she'd had mother, and went to the Alaskan Gold Rush. And Becky has, or had, most of the papers that he wrote. Beautiful writer. Just great long sentences and very accomplished and very bright and a lot of grammar and big words. And Becky has said since that she's read more of his stuff and she's looked up. I thought he died very soon after he finally came back, after grandmother had divorced him and married Mac. Mac was a student at Michigan, University of Michigan, in Ann Arbor, and she ran, I call it a B&B, what is it? It was
Like the lodging house?
yeah, a lodging house with meals for students. And she looked over the crop and decided that Mac was somebody who was going to be a provider and take care of her. And so she got him, and I think Mother probably attracted him more than Grandmother did. But because he was much younger than he was about 5 years younger, so that made him maybe 15 years older than Mother. So he was, and she was blonde and curly haired and blue eyed and beautiful child. Anyway, where did I
Clothes from Hollywood.
yeah, okay, yes, clothes from Hollywood. They were the fanciest clothes you ever saw, and I got a chance to wear each one, maybe of the dressiest things, maybe once, maybe twice, and then I grow out of it, and the next year a whole bunch more came from Bonwit Teller and Saks Fifth Avenue and all these fancy places. Just organdy dresses that were scratchy and itchy, but beautiful, hand sewn seams and things. And I didn't do any hard playing in those because they were fancy dresses, but I thought they were fun to have. And we had matching things. So I had to wear the same thing Becky wore, or Becky had to wear what I wore every day. Until maybe...
I can see Margot and Abby are excited at the thought of that. They think that's
I
pretty
like
cool.
to match Abby. Abby just doesn't like to match me.
Anyway, go
Well,
ahead.
that's all right. I didn't mind at first, but after a while it got to be really an old, stale story. And finally I was given permission to pick my own clothes. But they were clothes that Grandmother picked out, so I had knit skirt and jacket kind of thing with a blouse underneath it, with smocking on it maybe, or something like that. I had to wear shoes with lifts in them, and so I couldn't have saddle shoes. I had to wear Oxfords, essentially, and patent leather shoes for dress. That was okay for once in a while, but the rest of the time, because I had a tendency to be pigeon-toed, and that was what I wore.
So no corsets or petticoats or all that.
Oh, we had petticoats.
Nonsense.
You had to have a petticoat under a skirt. You might
Had to.
see through.
Oh, you had to.
How horrible.
You might just see through, and that went for the top too. You know, an undershirt or something like that, or a slip that went all the way from the shoulders down to knees. Everything was too long. Mother could look at clothes on me and tell exactly whether there was a 1/4 inch longer on one side than the other. We had a seamstress come about twice a year, and she would alter Mother's clothes and Becky's and my clothes, and we had to stand. There were 2 steps down from the main part of the house to the servants' wing. And the servants' wing had the garage underneath at ground level, and then 3 little rooms and a bathroom. And when we were little, there was a couple and an upstairs maid. And then by the time Becky got to be in school, 5 or 6 years old, they got rid of the
the upstairs maid, and we just had a couple. The couple. She did a lot of the cleaning, and she cooked 3 meals a day, and he did polish the silver and buttled, served the dinner, and chauffeured and drove me to school and brought me back, things like that. And that was the way we lived until the war. I can remember one of the couples was washing the windows above the garage, his windows that overlooked the backyard. And he fell off the ladder. I saw him fall head first. He bounced, and I was amazed. He got up and sort of staggered in the house, and he was all right. But I was amazed that happened. There were a whole series of different people who helped. One of them was Elizabeth, who stayed with us quite a few years. When the war came, they took jobs in factories, and that was big pay. They didn't find out until later that it was much cheaper to live on Mother's and Father's second floor over the garage and have all your food paid for and have your uniforms paid for and have insurance for health and so on. So they went back to that later after they finally had a baby. He was not accepted at the local school. The kids were really mean to him. Well, that was one of those things that is very difficult. Anyway, that was after my time. Where am I? I've wandered all over.
Did you guys wear bows? We have a picture of you at home with a big bow in your hair.
Oh, yeah, my sister came along, and she had real blonde curls all over her head and big blue eyes, and she was not nice. It was years later, but I was taken regularly
Sounds like you were dead.
to the barber shop, and my hair was shingled in back the way it is now, and it was just to the top of the ears here, and there was a part and a big bow barrette. I hated those bows. and there was a girl in my class named Sally Blair, who was number 6 or 7 of a big family, whose father had been a friend of my father when they were growing up in East Cleveland. She came to school every day. How that family did it with one maid and the mother and all these babies and children. She came to school every day with corkscrew pearls. Every single one, just perfect. They didn't even have hairspray in those days. And she'd have these corkscrew pearls, just perfect. And I had it shingled, and the barber did my hair, and it was like a boy's haircut. It was a lot like a boy's haircut.
I've seen
now.
it, right?
Yeah. Oh, terrible. What else in the clothing line? I don't know that there was. During the war, I took dancing lessons. We were given ballroom dancing lessons. I loved that. Mr. Thorne taught them, and he was very dignified and wore morning pants and a big chain and tails, and danced with some of the girls. He danced with me fairly often, and I thought that was fun. And then we had a formal dress for at least some of the dances. And boy, was it hard to get a formal dress in the war. So I got something that was sort of a fuchsia color. And I was not, I could probably wear that now with proper makeup and so on. All it did was make me look as though I was in my last stages of liver disease. This yellow, a mustard yellow face, and this still the hairdo. My mother finally gave in on the hairdo, and I had permanence then. Well, permanence just meant it was so hard to comb your hair, it was just pulling hair all the time. But at least I didn't have to have it bobbed and cut way short in it, so that was a help. But then I had to wear this dress, and it was, from then on, I never wore it that color again. You want to ask me a different kind of question, get me on a different subject? Or
Oh, yeah, I was
Gramps,
just
maybe
going
you want
to-
to get Gramps again.
I was going to ask both of you, did you have any favorite books or stories throughout your schooling time?
I had favorite books. I read every single fairy tale book on the shelves in Melbourne Library. And I finished them by about 4th grade, 5th grade. You know, the big book of, the fairy book of
Grimm's fairy tales?
Grimm's and
But they did
the
green
red
fairy, yeah, red book, green book,
and
yellow
all those
book.
colors, I
blue
read
book.
all of those. I read the little short ones. They weren't quite as much fun as those. But I was lost when I finished all the last one, and I didn't want to read the same thing over and over again. So I had to branch out and learn other things. One of my favorites was Mill on the Floss. That was given to us Thanksgiving weekend of my junior year in high school. I went home and sat down in the living room before it was finally furnished, but it was furnished slowly over time. And started it, and I couldn't put it down, so I read the whole thing. And then I came in Monday after Thanksgiving. I was so pleased. I just thought this was the most wonderful book I'd ever read. And I told Miss Bruce, the English teacher, it was a very Victorian lady. She had her hair all done up, it was gray. She wore beautifully manicured, she had beautifully manicured fingers. And she looked down her nose at me and she said, "Well, I can't call on you the whole time," because I'd read the whole thing. She told us to read the first 4 chapters or whatever, and she didn't expect us to read on anymore, and she was just horrified. I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And she was a mean, hard teacher because she had a red book that she kept records in, and she had a practice that she used all the time of posing a question and giving us 2 minutes to compose an oral paragraph. And then she'd call on different people to speak their oral paragraph. I remember one poor girl saying something, and she was interrupted at the end of the first sentence. "You should know better than that. You cannot have a first compound sentence as the leading sentence of a paragraph."
Uh-oh.
Yeah, nobody pays any attention to that anymore. But the idea was that the leading sentence is to give you an idea of what that subject is about. And it isn't about 2 different things unless you combine them as 2 different things that have something in common, which you could say although, or maybe some other, you could use a complex sentence, but not a compound sentence. So this girl got a big X. You could see what she was marking. No, it wasn't an X, it was a 0. She got a 0, or if you answered appropriately or got the idea, then you get a little check mark. So everybody knew what they were getting, and everybody else knew what everybody else in the room was getting, just from the way the pencil moved on her book. And then she'd go in and call on somebody else. And so I had 2 months of Mill on the Floss with nobody ever calling on me. I thought that was just marvelous. Once or twice she'd ask a question without that kind of paragraph business, and then I might say something. But
And I wasn't burdened by any such situations. I don't think I ever read an outside book until maybe just before I became a teenager.
in the summer, you didn't have to read anything over the summer?
Well, they might have given books, but I didn't read anything. My whole schooling was a sort of a wing it. You show up, and if you're called on, you answer. if you don't know the answer, then you should have done something to get ready for it, but, I never got into very heavy detail stuff, and Booth Tarkington, Penrod, I think, is the first book I read. And,
He doesn't remember before that.
no, those things,
You remember
civilization, things just washed over me. I just kept surviving as though, it's another day. The one thing I just thought of that, interrupting, where I grew up, I don't know whether they did this where you did, but if anyone got a communicable disease, scarlet fever or whatever,
Or lice.
a sign would go up on your house, they'd tack it up on your door. And then everyone would know,
Not to play with
yeah,
We could go out.
don't drop in there without taking
And
precautions or
people
whatever.
couldn't come to your house.
And here, I was raised Christian Science, and as far as I know, a sign went up on our house once among the 3 children raised down there in East Cleveland, and that was my sister with scarlet fever. And as I thought about it, I wondered how it was I could go in and out, and I wasn't made to stay home. I never missed a day of school, and as far as I know, no one else got infected. And as far as I could tell of my sister, she had a rosy complexion, and for me that would just be a bad skin day. Redhead, I freckled and burned and had all sorts of things happen to my skin. But that was the way they announced what was going on in the neighborhood, and that's how you communicated a lot of things. But books,
No library to speak of in your house?
no, right, and my family, the difference between our 2 families is so dramatic. You have a question on there somewhere that touches, that gets you to where you can touch on that subject. But this is a deeply educated family that Betty came from. Not wealthy, but educated, really educated. And gosh, I think her father and his siblings were all stunning students, and
Father was a sort of ordinary student,
right.
but he did a lot of activities and he wrote a lot and things like that. His oldest brother was a genius. He finished high school at something like 14, went off to college, finished college by about 17, and had law school under his belt, or whatever law training he had by the time he was 20 or 21.
Is that Alton's?
Yes, Alton
Alton.
Beavis. Alton Beavis. He was the oldest. He could play the piano, anything you wanted to hear. He entertained the whole family. He played the piano all evening long, and his younger brother did that too. They took turns playing the piano. Father never learned to play the piano. Father was dyslexic, I think. And his father's solution to that, because nobody knew anything about dyslexia in those days, was, well, if you're having trouble with that, the thing for you to do is learn languages. So that solution got Father lessons in Latin, Greek, German, French.
No
And-
Spanish?
No, Spanish was not a big thing in those days. The Spanish-speaking people were down south somewhere. No.
With the Italians.
Yes, Italians, we had Italian people come out, because there were a lot in Cleveland, and they dug up, the ladies would come in the early spring, and they'd dig up all the dandelions, and they'd take, fortunately, in those days, we didn't put extra fertilizer and stuff on the lawn, so they'd take the dandelion greens and take them home and eat them, I'm sure, but they cleared out the weeds that we had in the garden. And Father learned enough to get by, and he was good at writing. He wrote, he was head of the newspaper, he was head of the yearbook, he was head of the council, the student council. He was there during World War I, when a lot of the guys who would have been just a speck older would have been off to war. So it was similar to Graham's situation. But my mother never graduated from high school. The second guy, Mac, that my grandmother married, was the early version of an efficiency expert. And his job was to go around to little towns here and there, most of them somewhere in Illinois, in Ohio, but other states too, where he would take the family, they'd all rent a house somewhere, and he would set up an assembly line and get it all working so that it went smoothly, and then he'd move on to the next town or the next factory. As a result, Mother never completed all the requirements of all the schools that she'd gone to. So she finally started, what is this, Stone Mather. I don't know whether it's a relative of this
Part
Mather or
of
not.
Western Reserve.
Yeah, it's the Women's College of Western Reserve. And she started that and went through at the age of 18. Started at 18.
So she went to college but didn't finish high school?
Yeah.
Cool.
And she had, somewhere in that time, she had appendicitis. And in Cleveland Clinic, or any of the places around Cleveland, nobody knew what to do with an appendicitis. And she was taken from Marion, Ohio to Cleveland, and they finally brought in a doctor from New York who had to take the train. I guess they had flights, but you got on a train in New York and you got off in Cleveland the next morning. That's easy to do. And he operated and saved her life. But she had a lot of complications from having had this thing for a whole week before anybody did anything about it. And a lot of illness in her life, from partly that, and then later hay fever, Dust Bowl hay fever. She couldn't stay around Cleveland in the summer. So that's why we went to Canada, or went to California, or went somewhere else, because of mother. Do you need exercise?
No, I always get really antsy. I'm fidgety.
You want to fidget somewhere? You want to run? You want to do something else?
He wants me to play
I'm
with
fine.
your
I'm
hands.
just
That's what I do.
like this.
I'm like that too.
That's just